Memorandum. 2. The observers, the diagnosticians, the cartographers of the inner landscape. From the Bureau of Subjective Realities. Date: the cusp of a lunar phase. Subject: further inquiries into the mechanisms of the human condition. Seeing people for how they really are. This is not an act of vision, but of subtraction. It is the slow, careful removal of the projections you have cast upon them, the hopes you have draped over their shoulders, and the needs you have mistaken for their core identity. What remains is often simpler and more complex than the story you were telling yourself. You see the crude architecture of their trauma, the well-worn paths of their habits, the sharp, unvarnished edges of their primal wants. It is a lonely form of clarity. To see a person truly is to see them without the comforting filter of your own narrative, and to understand that you are, in turn, being seen with the same unruthless and unromantic eyes. Psychological motivations. The hidden engines in the basement of the soul. These are not the noble, stated reasons for action, but the deep, often shameful currents that actually move the will. The need to be perceived as good, driven by a terror of being cast out. The pursuit of power, fueled by an ancient childhood feeling of helplessness. The compulsion to care for others, a sophisticated disguise for a need to control. To understand these motivations is to see the puppet strings. Everyone is a marionette, dancing to the tune of a few simple, deeply buried melodies. In my psyche, mine eyes. A declaration of sovereignty over the inner world. In my psyche is to claim the chaotic, weather-beaten continent of the self. It is the seat of memory, dream, and personal myth. Mine eyes is the specific subjective lens through which that psyche views the external world. It is the unique colored palette of perception, the individual way one sees light fall on a face or interprets a glance or finds pattern in chaos. Together they form the unassailable fortress of individual experience, the only kingdom over which one truly and absolutely reigns. Tenure. Not just a job security, but a metaphysical state. It is the achievement of a right to occupy space, physical or intellectual, without the immediate threat of ejection. It is the permission to become eccentric, to dig deep rather than spread wide, to pursue questions that have no profitable answer. It is the academic equivalent of a deep-root system, allowing one to withstand the storms of shifting trends and political winds. Yet it can also be a trap, a comfortable, well-funded cage, where the fire of urgent inquiry is slowly replaced by the pilot light of maintained relevance. Energy medicine. The hypothesis that the body is not just a chemical machine, but a dynamic field of living force. Illness, in this view, is a stagnation, a blockage, or a depletion in this essential flow. The healer does not prescribe, but facilitates. They work as a plumber for the soul, unkinking the pipes of vitality, or as a gardener, tending to the subtle weather systems of the body. It is medicine that treats the blueprints, not the building, the music, not the instrument. Reiki. The practice of intentional, channeled warmth. It is not magic, but a focused application of a universal principle that directed attention can influence living systems. The practitioner becomes a conduit, a clear vessel for a fundamental life force, allowing it to flow into areas of another's body that have grown cold or quiet. It is a conversation without words, a transfer of peaceful intention from one nervous system to another. The recipient often feels not a miracle, but a deep spreading thaw, the sensation of a frozen knot inside them beginning, slowly, to melt. People emulator. A desperate and necessary piece of social software run by the introverted or the traumatized. It is a conscious, energy-intensive program that mimics human social responses in real time. It analyzes input, a joke, a complaint, a shared story, and generates the appropriate output, laughter, a sympathetic nod, a reciprocal anecdote. While the core self remains isolated, observing and conserving its true resources, it is a brilliant tool for passing, for functioning, but its constant operation is profoundly exhausting. It is the feeling of being a pilot in a human-shaped mech suit. The starving artists. A romanticized lie and a brutal truth The stereotype is of the passionate visionary suffering for the craft in a garret. The reality is often a person being slowly crushed by the indifference of the market, their creative spirit smothered under the weight of rent and student loans. The starving is not a noble choice, but a systemic failure to value the non-commercial dimensions of the human spirit. Yet within this pressure cooker, a certain purity can sometimes be forged, an art that is made not for an audience, but as a vital, non-negotiable act of breathing. Impractical. Follow your bliss. A philosophical fork in the road. The impractical path is paved with the sober stones of security, predictability, and deferred gratification. It is a safe, well-marked road that often leads to a quiet, comfortable resentment. Follow your bliss is the overgrown, treacherous trail into the wilds of uncertainty. It is not a guarantee of happiness, but a mandate for authenticity. It is the decision to listen to the deep, inner magnetic pull, even when it leads away from the map. The two are eternally at war, and the truce between them is a life of quiet desperation. The victory of one over the other is either bankruptcy or a soul-deep regret. Ethics. The self-imposed architecture of a coherent soul. It is not a list of rules, but a personal and collective skeletal structure that determines what shapes a life or a society can take. It is the internal compass that points toward a concept of good, even when that direction is inconvenient, unprofitable, or dangerous. To have ethics is to build a house with load-bearing walls. To lack them is to live in a tent that will collapse at the first strong wind of temptation or pressure. They are the limits we choose to make us limitless in our humanity. A traveling nurse. A modern-day wandering monk of mercy. Their vocation is one of radical impermanence. They bring their skills to the epicenters of crisis, the places of greatest need and breakdown. They are a stabilizing force in a temporary world, a calm presence in the chaotic vortex of illness and injury. They see the inside of countless rooms, the intimate details of countless strangers' suffering, and then they move on. Their life is a study in attachment and release, and building quick, deep trust, and then surrendering it to the next location, the next patient, the next unknown address. Gender ideology is destroying souls. A statement of profound alarm from a specific shoreline of belief. It perceives the expanding conversation around gender not as liberation, but as a fundamental assault on a natural, divine, or biological order. The fear is that in deconstructing categories held as sacred and immutable, we are not freeing people but severing them from an essential anchor of their being, their soul. It is the terror of the mapmaker watching the continents themselves begin to drift, believing the entire world will be lost to the sea. New moon. Full moon. The celestial pendulums swing between potential and manifestation. The new moon is the black screen, the empty page, the held breath. It is the seed deep in the dark soil, all future contained within, but nothing yet visible. It is a time for intentions, for planting the silent wishes of the heart. The full moon is the blazing spotlight, the finished manuscript, the triumphant shout. It is the bloom in full, radiant flower, the culmination of the cycle. It illuminates everything, especially what was hidden in the shadows, and demands a reckoning. It is a time for harvest, for release, for seeing things exactly as they are. Dayglow, daydream. A conscious retreat into a hyper-saturated inner world. This is not the vague meandering of a bored mind, but a deliberate plugging into a brighter, simpler, more vibrant reality. The colors are synthetic, the emotions are pure, the narratives are uncomplicated by shadow or nuance. It is a psychic safety blanket woven from neon threads and pop songs, a temporary shelter from the muted, complicated grays of the adult world. It is the mental equivalent of turning on a black light in a dark room. Decoding my life. The lifelong effort to find the pattern in the noise. It is the belief that one's existence is not a random sequence of events, but a text written in a complex personal language. The therapist's office, the journal, the long conversations with friends, these are all deciphering tools. Every synchronicity is a potential clue, every repeated trauma a key symbol, every heartbreak a difficult passage to be translated. The goal is to stop being a character bewildered by the plot and to become the reader who understands, finally, what the story was always about. In shadow. To be in part of oneself that is denied, repressed or deemed unacceptable. This is not a place of evil, but a place of raw material. It contains the anger you were not allowed, the wildness you were taught to tame, the needs you learned to hide. To go in shadow is not a descent into darkness, but a reclamation project. It is the difficult, necessary work of venturing into the basement of the self, not to live there, but to bring up the valuable artifacts you left behind in your rush to become presentable. Stationary direct. The moment of decision. In astrology, a planet appears to halt in the sky before resuming its forward motion. This is the human equivalent. It is the breath at the top of the dive, the finger hovering over the button, the final second of silence before the yes or no is spoken. All potential energy is concentrated into a single pregnant point. The world holds its breath. Then the commitment is made and the path is chosen. Motion begins. Stationary retrograde. The moment of introspective pause. The planet stops, appearing to consider before turning backward. This is the internal recalibration. It is the sudden, unavoidable need to stop progressing and to instead reconsider, review, and re-examine. It feels like being stuck, but it is a necessary stuckness. Forward momentum is not possible until something from the past is understood. A mistake is corrected. A lesson is fully integrated. It is the universe forcing a period of reflection. Everything kills. The universal tax on existence. To live is to participate in a system of consumption and decay. The lettuce you eat, the air you breathe, the space you occupy, it all comes at a cost to another form of life or potential. Even love can kill a certain kind of freedom. Even peace can kill ambition. This is not a morbid observation, but a sobering and ultimately freeing one. It removes the illusion of innocence. To accept that everything kills is to make conscious, ethical choices about what is worth the cost and to live with a profound responsibility of that choice. Soul growth. The antithesis of comfort. It does not happen in the sunlight of easy success, but in the dark, rich soil of failure, loss, and disorientation. It is the process of having a tightly held identity shattered and then painstakingly assembling a new, more spacious one from the pieces. It is the expansion of the heart that can only occur after it has been broken open. It is not pleasant. It often feels like dying, but it is the only thing that justifies the pain of being conscious, the slow, lifelong project of outgrowing your own smaller selves. Ginger bug. A wild, living starter, a simple concoction of ginger, sugar, and water, left to capture the feral yeast and bacteria from the air. It is a lesson in symbiosis. You feed it, and it animates, it bubbles, it ferments. It becomes a reservoir of life force that can, in turn, enliven other substances, turning sweet tea into a spicy, effervescent drink. It is a tiny kitchen-bound ecosystem, a testament to the invisible, vital world of microorganisms that we host and that host us. It is democracy in a jar. Sexual inversion. An archaic term that attempted to cage a wild truth. It was the clinical label for the phenomenon of desire that did not follow the presumed natural order. The label itself was a form of violence, a pathologizing of a different kind of magnetic pull. But the core truth it failed to describe is real. That the object of one's deepest attraction can be for some a mirror rather than an opposite, a complement of spirit rather than of biological design. The term is a relic, but the reality it clumsily tried to name is a permanent part of the human spectrum. Penis envy. A controversial cornerstone of a specific psychological architecture. The theory posits a foundational lack in the female psyche, but perhaps it can be reinterpreted not as a literal desire for a physical organ, but as a metaphor for the perceived power, autonomy, and uncomplicated social access symbolized by that organ in a patriarchal structure. It is not the flesh that is envied, but the key it supposedly represents. The theory, whether valid or not, itself became a tool for perpetuating the very lack it described. The Frankenstein mentality, playing God. The ambition to bypass natural process. It is the intellect's belief that it can assemble life from component parts, that it can design a soul through engineering, that it can impose order on the messy, organic, and slow work of evolution or divinity. It is the ultimate expression of the hubris of the mind, the attempt to create without love, to birth without womb, to animate without spirit. The tragedy is not that the creation is monstrous, but that it is lonely, parentless, and eternally seeking a warmth its creator was incapable of building into it. The eternal portal, the point of access that is always present. It is not a door in a wall, but a threshold in the fabric of the everyday. It can be found in the space between waking and sleep, in the rhythm of a breath, in the silent gap between two thoughts. It is the entryway to the numinous, the place where the veil between this world and the other is thin. Some find it in prayer, some in meditation, some in the utter absorption of creating or beholding art. It is always there, waiting for the perceiver to become receptive. The disturbing internet. The global ID, digitized and amplified, it is the vast, uncurated repository of humanity's darkest curiosities, its most niche hatreds, its most bizarre fetishes, and its most profound loneliness. It is a hall of mirrors that reflects not your face, but the shape of your deepest fears and your unspoken desires. It connects the vulnerable to the predator, the seeker to the guru, the lonely to the mob. It is a tool of incredible liberation and a weapon of immense destruction, and it has permanently altered the atmosphere of the collective human mind. The clitoris, the biological proof that female pleasure is an independent, sovereign function. It exists for one purpose only, sensation and climax. It is not a passive vessel, but an active, complex organ of intense feeling. Its historical erasure from medical texts and cultural discourse was not an oversight, but a deliberate silencing of this truth. Its acknowledgement is a revolutionary act. It is the anatomical argument against the idea that woman's body is merely complementary to man's. It is a testament to a self-contained and powerful system of enjoyment.